Welcome to another edition of Cattle Call, being brought to you by FNBO, the Great Big Small Bank. I'm Susan Littlefield. Well, I am proud to say you heard it here first. Last week, when Brad talked about cash being king, and then look what happened, 3 to 5 higher on the trade. Is it cash is king 2.0? We're going to find out all those details as we see a decent numbers coming out of the sale barn. But what kind of pressure are we seeing within the market trade? And we know that there's been some issues with regards to Tyson and Cargill as well this week. We're got a lot to unpack on this week's episode. And as you heard me mention, it's Brad Kooima. He is with KKV Trading, and he, of course, is looking at this market. You said it last week. You and I were talking about this before we even started this program. You went out on a limb and said cash is going to be king. We are going to see some good numbers last week. And lo and behold, 3 to 5 higher.
Yeah. Well, get everybody behind me is going like, don't encourage him. His ego's big enough already, right? Thanks for the shout out. Everybody remembers when you're wrong, right? But bad news beats you home, but good news nobody talks about. Thanks for having me on, Susan. I enjoy this a lot. You're right. Cash market was fun last week. It just, sometimes you get a bit of a feeling, right? When you get some interest from the packer, you get them closer to the knife, maybe a few less captive supply cattle in the mix, and just kind of a feeling that you're getting a little more current, so that you got guys that are able to say no in case they don't like what's going on. So there's a lot of stuff in play, I think, on that cash cattle market. One is that there's less of them. Two is that you've got a regional imbalance of supply to a degree, where you've got a real tight supply in the south, and the further south you go, the tighter it gets. It sounds like, I can tell you story after story of cattle up here. I'm up here is Iowa, by the way, of cattle getting sold here and hauled all the way down to Texas to kill, and the packers paying the freight. So now that doesn't happen unless they're tight there, and if they're chasing also grade, which the cattle we've got right now, of course, are long-fed calves, and they're going to grade their hind end off, right? That's a couple of those things I think are in play. And you got a packer he's got a difficult. I don't feel sorry a bit for the packer, of course, as you know, but he's got a bit of a challenge here. It's the first week of December. He's got meat sold. Demand's good, really good. He's actually making a little bit of money. What in the world? So what's he going to do? As we go into this holiday period, he's got to get in there and get his boots dirty, And so, I like the position we're in here. There's always something that can go wrong, of course, but I love the way the cash is showing this continued leadership, like you mentioned.
So is this going to be like an 11th hour Friday afternoon where we start to really see those numbers break? Because cattle guys know what last week was like.
We had the holiday, and then we, took a chance there last Wednesday that they needed to have an extra day off because they're so overworked. These cattle buyers are, right? So I think my experience would be the longer it takes on a normal week, usually the better it gets. So if we want to hang tough and play this game of chicken until Friday afternoon, that's just fine with me. One of the things, and I don't know, sometimes I get too granular, I think, for maybe the listeners, but one of the things that I think some of the feeders are thinking about, Susan, and so if anybody's trying to buy feeder cattle, maybe you're watching some of these sales that are on the internet today, and I know I am, and feeder cattle always feel high to the guy that's buying them, but I mean these feeder cattle now they're I don't know if I've ever quite experienced a market quite like this. So let's just put it this way. Let's say you had a set of cattle that were almost fat, but not really fat. What would you do? Knowing that your replacement cost is somewhere up here, right? And wouldn't you be tempted to maybe be a little tougher with the cattle that you have in your feedlot and say, you know what, I can't replace these things anyway. We'll see how that plays out. I'm never crazy about what I call this holding action rally. But you can get by with it if it's only for a little while. So I think that's kind of the leverage position that the feeder's in right now. So I think that the cash is going to be pretty good here for the next few weeks.
And it doesn't come as no surprise. I mean, it was talked about in the marketplace. Tyson shutting some facilities down, the one in Kansas, now in Pennsylvania. And those are fabrications. Those aren't kill floor operations. And then Cargill saying that they too are going to be cutting back and doing some layoffs. It didn't seem to blip very long in the market trade, or am I missing something?
I don't think you are at all, Susan. And great point. Other than the headline algorithms that reacted to that Emporia plant closing, but you're right. It's a fab deal that made a specialty product, in fact, and doesn't affect the ability to harvest cattle at all. So it didn't take too long for the market to respond to that. Yesterday it was a nice day, I think, reacting to the overreaction to the downside. So, not to be a smart aleck here, but there's going to be less cattle. Somebody's going to have to go without. I mean, so they're going to talk about, we're going to have to slow it down, whatever, does that sound like 2014? Of course it does. That's exactly what happened then. I mean, we went weeks and weeks and weeks of 32-hour kill weeks there because that's all the cattle that were to go around. We really haven't got to those numbers yet. We haven't got to that real tightness where they really wind you spring tighter because we're holding heifers and everything else, right? We have killed 125 or 26,000 today again. That's a lot of cattle. So I don't know. It's going to get really interesting, I think. And unfortunately, there's a lot of risk when you got the markets up this high. But I think we're in a place here that a lot of us old guys in the cattle business have been waiting a long time to see just where the rubber's going to meet the road.
So then let's talk about Mexico. There were midweek, as you and I are talking, those rumors flying that the border is going to open, but you and my sources all say, nope, it's still a couple weeks away. How much of a market pressure does this continue to be?
Well, it's something, I guess, that's a factor because it was the day it came out. Okay. This was a week ago Monday that we reacted to the weekend news that it was going to close. If you've forgotten, we had feeder cattle futures traded 4.5, a couple of months or even as much as $5 higher. They did not close that way, if you recall. So the month, I guess I'm kind of marking here would be the January feeder cattle contract, closed at 255.47 a week ago Monday, 255.47. Today we closed at 256.95. So not quite $1.50 higher, $1.50, only $1.50 higher than when we reacted to this news. Okay, I think that the market is building in the surety that they are going to reopen, and it's going to be sooner rather than later. It's going to be days or weeks, and not months and months and months. Protocol has been established. USDA APHIS has said what they're going to do. Ivermectin is an effective treatment. I hope, and I guess my opinion is going to be that the expectation that's going to reopen, we've got time to think about it. And if it opens soon enough, it lessens the whole thing anyway. And we're not even that much higher than we were the day it came out. So if you're following the northern feeder cattle trade, the demand and the seem to be the need to have possession by some of these guys that are buying these cattle, regardless of price almost, will probably carry anything. Maybe we get a little bump. I mean, when feeder cattle are this high, my goodness, we can certainly have a little bit of softness here. But I don't know. I think the stuff's in pretty tight hands.
So finally, as we wrap up this week's episode, weights, you're talking about the weights of these cattle doing a little tipping.
Thank you for remembering that so that I would talk about it. We need to have next day weights. Okay. I've been campaigning for that for about 3 or 4 years now. But the weights that we do get, even albeit that they are a little bit late, last week, the weights that come out that are for 2 weeks ago, we were down 4 pounds in the steer and heifer carcass. That's the one that I always watch, steer and heifer carcass weights, down 4 pounds week on week, and 19 over a year ago, which is still a lot. But remember, we've been 30, 35 over a year ago for what seems like forever. The other weights that are less comprehensive, but I get them quicker. Some of the regional weights, I mentioned before on your program that Texas and Kansas is really where the weight problem is, and not as much. Iowa was right in the equilibrium of what was the 5-year average on their weights. It was Texas and Kansas that were unusually heavy. The last 3 weeks, their weights have really dropped quickly there, and to a degree in Iowa too, and which makes some sense as you get through some of the longer fed calves in the north in particular. So I'm watching that very carefully. We get some weight off the market. That's been the one gorilla in the room, well, yeah, it's okay, but we're not very current, and so if we start to see these weights come back off, that'll make me even a little more inspired to think we can get this market on top of 200.
All right, sounds good, Brad. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you guys?
The phone is 712-722-0023, Susan, or you can find all you want and maybe more than you need to know about us on kkvtrading.com.
All right, Brad Kooima has been joining us this week. Quick reminder that commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. That's another week edition of the Cattle Call being brought to you by FNBO, the great big small bank, right here on the Rural Radio Network.